So in this tutorial, we will learn how to import models from Blender to Unreal Engine in a very quick and easy way. So it will serve like a really good foundation for getting to know Unreal Engine and learning the software, especially if you're a Blender user. But hey, let's just get right into it. So the first thing you have to take care of when you're going to import a model from Blender to Unreal Engine is to prepare your model inside Blender. So you might think that for Unreal Engine, for a game engine, you have to have very few polygons to be able to render it in real time, but that's actually not the case. So the amount of polygon is not usually the problem is the draw calls. To show you, this model was the one I used for the project, and you can see it's actually pretty high poly. So I used more polys in the front because I needed it because of the reflections. They didn't look so nice there. And if you use too few polys for a car, you will never get good reflections. You have to have a decent amount of polygons before it looks good. What I did, however, to optimize for Unreal Engine is to combine a lot of the meshes. So for every, like I mentioned, for every object, you will have a draw call. So that means if you have 1,000 objects, you will have 1,000 draw calls. But a lot of those objects can probably be combined into one mesh, and then you will like just skip a lot of draw calls, and that is really good for the performance. However, if you have an object with 5 different materials, then Unreal Engine has to go in and make 5 draw calls, one draw call for each material. So you have to keep that in mind too. That also means that often it's a good idea to combine meshes with the same material. So let me give you an example here. So for this car, I have an object called block geometry. This is basically a lot of black geometry. If you see here, it's like the stuff inside the wheel and things like this. And all that has the same material. Right now I have a lot of materials here, but that's just because I haven't reduced all the ones I don't use. This means this object will only take one draw call, which is super good for performance. Another thing that this mesh does is that it actually fixes a problem that you have in real-time engines that you won't have in a normal ray tracer or inside Blender. And that is the back-facing culling. So the way Blender works, if you add a plane, then you will be able to see it from both directions. It's totally fine. Like, why would you not, right? But if you go into Blender and then disable or enable backface culling, then you can see how the backface just disappears. And this is how Unreal Engine works, because if you have to calculate both sides of the object, it actually takes more performance. Because of that, then you will have to just do a quick test in Blender. What you can do is, let me just hide this block geo, then you can see what the problem is. If you look through here, you can actually see through the mesh, and that's super weird because the background out there is like, yeah, it shouldn't be there. It should be blocked. And if you want to test this really quickly, then just go to this tab up here and click face orientation. And then you can turn this back on. You can see everything that's red will be rendered wrong inside Unreal Engine. You can see even here there's a problem. There's even a hole here that you will be able to see even if it could render the back faces. So that's why I usually make a block geometry mesh. It's just a very quick mesh done with a lot of planes and quick modeling, because it doesn't have to look nice. It just has to cover all these red spots, more or less. There's a little bit of see-through here, but you probably won't notice it in the film. So those are some important things. Another thing is that the textures that you're using are also very important, especially if you take your video memory into account. So don't go much over 4K in general. If you go from 4K to 8K, that means you'll have 4 times as much video memory spent on that one texture. And you might think that you can just compress the textures, but that's not how it works, because Unreal Engine, and actually also Blender, has to read the textures uncompressed into the video memory. That means that if you have too many textures, Unreal Engine just won't render. The same goes for the resolution. If you make a bigger resolution render, if you want to render everything in 4K, you have to have a lot of video memory free to be able to do that. In Cycles, it doesn't really matter because the resolution doesn't take more video memory, but in Unreal Engine it does. So there are a few things you have to be aware of in relation to performance, but most importantly, the geometry is not, the amount of polygons is not the most important. The most important is the draw calls. Keep them low, so keep a few objects in there and use a lot of instancing. We'll get into that later. And then the last one is backface culling. Just make sure that you don't have these see-through areas in your mesh when you import it. So a good workflow to have inside Unreal Engine is to kind of split your objects into 3 main categories. The first category is what is known as a prop. So you might know this from video games or from Prop Hunt or whatever. Prop hunts, or props are basically just objects that can be scattered around your scene. So this here is an object from Megascans, from the Quixel library. And it can be scattered maybe 5 times throughout the scene in different places, because this one can basically be any size, any rotation, doesn't matter. It's not specific, it doesn't have to have a specific placement in the scene. Then there is the set object. So the set is kind of things that has to have a certain location or a certain rotation or something in the scene. This could be if you, for instance, the road in my render was a set because I knew that that one had to be under the car in a specific location. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. It's like the big piece, right? The same if you have a room, then the room would be the set. Like imagine a living room with couches and furniture and everything. Then the walls with the room would be the set because they kind of have a specific location. You'll probably set this up inside Blender. And then your props will be the chairs and the tables and the couches and everything else. And the plants. But nevertheless, this is kind of the outline, the idea, and you don't have to follow this rule, but oftentimes it's really good to think of it like this. Think of it like this. You have sets and you have props, and probably also a hero object, which is kind of its own thing. So now we have everything set up inside Blender. I just made some very quick materials here. They won't be exported entirely into Unreal Engine, but we will have the albedo color in Unreal Engine so we can see what kind of color everything should be, and that's really nice to have. Another thing is that I also have all the material slots ready, so I don't have to fix that in Unreal Engine. I already know that here we'll have aluminium on this piece here, and here I will have car paint and aluminium and windows and car paint, a secondary car paint color, and tires. The tires actually doesn't make sense. I don't think it's supposed to be there. So to export to Unreal Engine, there is a really cool add-on made by Epic Games, which just does this automatically for you. So you have to download the add-on, and it's a bit cumbersome to get it because you have to get it from GitHub, from the official GitHub, and you have to sign up and be in and get like an invitation to join their GitHub. It's all free and it's not limited to a certain amount of people, but it just takes some time to get it to work. But once you have the add-on downloaded, you just go and install it in Blender like any other add-on, and then you enable it. It's called Send to Unreal. When you've done that, all you have to do is actually just launch Unreal Engine. And when you have done that, just click Pipeline, Export, and Send to Unreal. So I set up a shortcut for this just to make it easier. But let me just open Unreal Engine so you can see how it works. So I already went ahead and set up a blank project. You don't have to add any specific starter content. If you want to, you can do that. But just be aware that the first time you're launching a new project, Unreal has to compile shaders, which we're not used to in Blender either, maybe a bit in Eevee, but this can take a long time. So just expect that it will probably take half an hour maybe for the first launch. When we're inside Unreal Engine, there are a few things we have to check. Right now I'm in Unreal Engine 5, but the plugin works both with Unreal Engine 5 and Unreal Engine 4. So just go ahead and check that the plugin Python edits a script plugin is enabled. And also editor scripting utilities is enabled. These might be enabled by default, but just check it if something is not working. Then afterwards, you have to go into the project settings and then search for Python and enable this checkbox here, which is called Enable Remote Execution. This basically allows Blender to just send data to Unreal. So this is great. Everything's set up now and we're ready to just import. So what we do is just drop the meshes that we want to export into the mesh folder, the mesh collection. So this mesh collection is automatically generated by the add-on. So you just drop all the meshes you want to export in here, and then you either click your shortcut or go to the menu Pipeline, Export, and Send to Unreal. Now it might look like Blender actually crashed, but it didn't. Depending on how big your export is, Blender is actually exporting an FBX in the background and just loading that into Unreal afterwards. But this can take some time, and if Blender does this, don't worry. Just give it a minute to calculate and then check back later and see if it exported properly. So you will see inside Unreal Engine that it starts to do this importing and then it goes through all your objects. Okay, so the import finished and I can see we have some issues here. Usually these don't really matter so much. To me, they haven't been a problem. This just means that some of the normals and some of the tangents are very small. That's probably because I have some meshes with with geometry which is very close to each other, like two vertices that are very close to each other, and Unreal Engine might not be able to view that or to show that properly. But I haven't found that to be an issue for me. The same with the smoothing groups. Usually it works when I export, so I would just ignore these. So now you can see that nothing really changed inside Unreal Engine. We have no model here, and that's because right now it's located in the untitled category inside untitled assets. So in here you can see you have all the objects from Blender, and you can start to control click all of them, the objects that we want to put into our scene. Not grid, we don't need that. Or maybe we do. And just drag it into a scene. And there you go. There you have the model from Blender. Let's just turn it around here. And now Unreal Engine again is just compiling the shaders that is imported from Blender. And we'll check back when it's done. Now let's just go over how you can update or re-export stuff from Blender to Unreal Engine, because often you realize that you need to change something when you get it into Unreal Engine, and that's where the add-on is really cool because it makes this process very easy. Just make sure you don't change object names along the way, because then Unreal gets confused. So you have to keep the naming convention, and that's also why it's good to find good names in the beginning and then stick to those names. Also, by the way, if you want to change this directory here, what you need to do is to go into your add-on preferences under under paths, and then change the path here. So this could be Blender assets and then McLaren car or something like that. And then it will import it into Unreal Engine within those folders inside Unreal Engine. So let's say we wanted to add the change to the wheels. So what we can do if we want to add an object is to just take our objects here, which are already in Blender, and drop them directly into the mesh collection. Now you can see they appear here, and that's great. This is all we have to do inside Blender. What I will do, just to save some time, is to actually hide all the other objects or move them to another collection. Because we don't need to import all the other objects again, we already did that. And so I will just select these, invert the selection, and drop all this to the hidden folder. Now let's just go ahead again and click export and send to Unreal. And back in Unreal we can see that our stuff has been imported, and we can go in here and find our chains. They are here. And drop them into the scene. So right now they are located in the wrong place, and but that's very easy to fix, because you can see all our objects are exported with their origin point at the center of the scene. So this just means that we have to go into our body, and actually let's just put all the other geometry under the body. This will make it much easier for us to manage. And later on we could go ahead and make a blueprint for the car, which is something you would often do with a hero object, because then you can add animations, you can add a skeleton even if you want to do that, but that's for another day. So now let's take our chains and also drop them inside here, and just zero out the transform here. Now they also need to be zeroed out in the rotation, and then they should match, and they do. That is perfect. So this is how you import objects afterwards. But what if we want to actually change something which is inside the mesh that is already in here? So that's also pretty easy to do. Let's just go back to Blender, and let's drop these back into the hidden folder, because we won't need to export them again. Let's get the body and the detail and put it back here. So I want to take the windscreen wipers and just put it up, because that's maybe what I wanted to do in this scene. Now just a little tip on how to do something, rotating something quickly inside Blender if you need a very specific axis. So we want to rotate these windscreen wipers up here, so they are kind of like at their up position. So you can use the 3D cursor to do this. First you have to click the 3D cursor here and just make sure that inside the tool and active tool you have picked geometry as the orientation, because then it will align to the geometry. So let's put the 3D cursor here and see if looks like the orientation would fit, and change the transform orientation from global to cursor, and pick the 3D cursor as the pivot point. Now we can rotate around the z-axis of the 3D cursor, and this should be working. Let's see. It's not working entirely, but let's just give it a little bit of rotation here as well. And I think that's decent enough for this example. So let's get rid of the body again, because we don't really need that. That was just for a reference. And we only need to re-export this part here. So let's just go ahead and We don't even have to select it, it just has to be in the mesh folder, and click select or click pipeline, export, send to Unreal. And there you go. Then we can see that our windscreen wiper is now intersecting the windscreen and is looking kind of ridiculous, but it at least worked. We can very easily re-import and update our mesh if needed. This workflow is really cool because you can so easily just jump back into Blender and do some changes, and then go back into Unreal and see that the model is updated there. So one thing which is also really cool about Unreal Engine is that it has some kind of automatic instancing. So all the objects you have here, when you drag them into the scene another time, it's kind of instancing them. So it's like if you are using Blender and you use the same mesh data for multiple objects. So this means that if you have a rock in a folder here, for instance a rock asset from Megascans, you can put it multiple places in your scene. It will take a bit more performance, but it will be instanced like we know from Blender. So I went ahead and added some few preset materials to our model, and just to show kind of like how Unreal Engine works. So this is running in Unreal Engine 5, but not with Lumen, because Lumen has a tendency to not do the reflection the same way. So if we go in here into the project settings, you can search for reflection, and you can switch it here from ray trace to Lumen. And you can see it feels like Lumen is doing some kind of reflection here that is screen spaced, since when this yellow stuff is outside the screen space, then it disappears in the reflection. This is really sad because that means that the reflections won't be accurate. It looks like it has some kind of fallback, but this might just be because I'm using Lumen wrong. But I've also heard other people talking about that Lumen is not the best solution for reflections. So this here still needs a lot of work. You can see how the reflections are very wobbly. That's because a lot of settings inside Unreal Engine are very optimized, and they do not work so well with automotive rendering because it has to do with very sharp reflections and very clear surfaces. But what I will suggest you do is to watch the video, which will appear up here somewhere. And it's from Unreal, or from the guys at Unreal Engine from Epic Games, where they go over how to render cars inside Unreal Engine. They have a super good tutorial where they go through all these technical things you need to know. There are a lot of console variables. That's basically console commands here you have to write and activate to actually make your car look good inside Unreal Engine. It's kind of a shame, but it's because it's not built for making cars. You can do it, but it's more like made for video games in general. So one last thing is that you might want to actually go back to Unreal Engine 4 for a car project right now, in my experience at least, because a lot of the things worked very well in UV4, and in UE5 it might not work the same way anymore. But do some testing and do some research. Now you at least know how to import models from Blender to Unreal Engine and how easy it is to actually get started doing that. And you can play around and try out different things and check out some really good content that Unreal Engine has online on how to learn all these extra things. There is a lot of knowledge to get there. So RTMG, the real-time motion graphics course by Mitch Sinoviv. It's aimed at motion designers and visual artists who want to learn about new techniques to quickly generate ideas and produce great-looking renders at breakneck speed. So I went through this course myself, and I found so many small golden nuggets of tips and tricks in here. Even just the way that Mitch sets up Blender made me rethink my own workflow. So I would recommend this course to anybody who is interested in motion design or just want to be more creative in their workflows. Check the description for the link along with the coupon code. For the early birds, you will get 30% off until the 17th of June, but even after that you can still grab a 15% discount code when using the link. So I hope you feel a bit more comfortable now jumping into Unreal Engine, especially if you're using Blender. If you haven't seen it already, you can go check out my podcast. In the first episode, I talked to one of my friends about a short film that he recently published. I created the podcast because I really enjoy listening to conversations myself about CG, and I feel like there's not enough of them out there. So the idea is it's a CG Square where you can go and learn from other people and just have nice conversations with other artists and hear what they're up to. But hey, that was all. Have a nice day, and I hope to see you in the next one.